Why should you read more? No, tell me. Give me 3 reasons why we should read books. There's always this vague idea being thrown around that reading books is good for you, but this vague principle doesn't give me motivation to read. Hi, I'm Michael, I'm a student at Brown University, and I see reading as the cheat code to life. More often than not, people have spent months or years researching the content that they are looking to publish in books, and oftentimes someone's life work is usually summarized within one book. Imagine having the time to live multiple lives and to gain the wisdom and experience of multiple lives. We can because of books. I only started reading consistently when I saw the benefits that reading could provide for me in my life. So besides understanding why I should read more, here are the steps that I took to make reading a consistent habit. Make sure to stick around until the end to learn the best way to remember everything that you read. Number 1, read multiple books at once. In elementary school, I remember my teacher saying that it was not recommended from her to read multiple books at once. And at first, I was very intimidated to do so because I felt like my mind could not keep up with so many books. But the thing is that when I focus on reading one book, I often get bored of it so easily because it's just one topic, and I often don't have the attention span or the consistency to read about one topic and consistently motivate myself to start reading that one topic every single day. It's more exciting to read when the topics we're reading about are something that interests us. So I often read multiple books in a variety of topics. And sometimes I fall off from a book, but that's bound to happen, and it's okay to not finish a book if you don't like it. In terms of the types of books that I recommend reading, I usually see the idea of being thrown around of reading one fiction book, one non-fiction book, and one other book that is to your interest. But in general, I'm just not the biggest fan of fiction personally, so I usually just end up reading different non-fiction books in different genres. Which leads me to my second piece of advice. Find your genre. When I first started reading, and I think as a lot of us started reading in elementary school and middle school and high school, a lot of the books that were given to us were fiction books. They tell a story, they have some sort of moral, they're there to entertain us. And ironically enough, these are my least favorite types of books because I'm the type of person who, when I read something, I want to be able to get practical advice that can be applied to my life immediately. And of course, fiction provides some sort of story or moral in the book, but I just don't find that as captivating or interesting as finding some sort of book that will give me steps that I can apply to my life immediately. I didn't start reading for fun or as a habit until late high school because the books that were presented to me throughout my life were mostly fiction or some sort of historical fiction or some biography that were presented to teach me about something, and it just didn't captivate my interest. But when I finally took the time to find my genre, which is now more along the lines of self-help, psychology, and other topics in that area, I find myself to be much more motivated to read those books because I personally enjoy it. Other people enjoy reading fiction, and that's completely fine. But reading as a habit is so important in terms of trying to improve your understanding of the world and your perspective of the world through the lens of other people. It teaches you so much. In fact, whenever I have some sort of idea that I want to research about life, psychology, anything, I try to look up a book and see if there's something that can help explain the situation in my life. And I feel like I get so much wisdom from the book after I read it. In fact, there's a saying that goes, if you read 3 books on a subject, you're an expert compared to 99% of individuals. And although this situation doesn't apply in every single subject, for example, basic mathematics, taking the step to, for example, read 3 books about personal finance would put you a leg above everybody else in a very major way. So reading books about any subject that captivates your interest or comes to mind is one of the best ways to motivate yourself to keep reading. But besides finding your genre, there's also the idea of finding your medium. In other words, I'm not the biggest fan of hardcover books, although I do get the appeal of physical books. One step that I took was to buy a Kindle, which looks like this. It's a device that you can hold in your hand and upload books to. And this device in general is very light, which is very convenient for me, and it's very easy to use in terms of uploading any sort of PDF or book that you want to read. You can even upload textbooks if you wanted to, but I don't see a point in that. But every night before I would go to bed, I have this on my nightstand, so then I can simply go through and read a couple of pages of a book if I want to, or if I'm feeling tired, I'll just go to bed. But the fact that I invested in such a device like this makes it so much easier to get books and to get access to books without the hassle of having to carry the weight of them. But if you're a fan of paper books, that's completely fine. I would just recommend trying out a Kindle to see if that's something more to your liking. Step 3 is to make it a habit. In James Clear's book Atomic Habits, he describes the process of changing a habit. And while I believe that changing a habit originally came down to changing the actions, it comes more down to the changing of my identity. In other words, if I want to eat healthier, I would change my identity to become one of a healthy person. And by simply asking myself, what would a healthy person do in this situation, it changes my identity and it changes my actions as a result. In other words, the same logic can be applied for becoming a reader. Rather than saying I want to read more books, I start to identify myself as a reader and reinforce that habit by keeping up with small tasks related to reading every day. I also try to find a time every day where I can read. So sometimes I like to read at lunch, but in general, if I'm waiting on a line, instead of listening to music, I just like to take out a book on the Kindle app and then just start reading that, which is another benefit I find of having an electronic form of a book on hand. Of course, I could also carry a hard copy, but I find that too cumbersome. I also try to read a little bit before I go to bed if I'm up to it, and if I'm really invested in the book, sometimes I'll stay up even half an hour, depending on how invested I am in the novel. But in terms of habit and identity change, the best way to change your identity is to reinforce that with the actions that you do. So it's sort of a two-way street. In other words, I like to keep the habit of reading 1 page per day. Yes, 1 page per day is all I try to set myself to do. And sometimes I don't follow that in terms of reading 1 page of a book. Of course, we all read menus, we all read words every day, but reading a page of a book, I find, is the habit that I find reinforces best the idea or mindset that I am a reader. And most of the time, I do read 1 page a day, whether it be on my phone, on the Kindle app, or on my Kindle itself, or even a physical book. But setting the limit so low is the best way to ensure that the habit sticks. I could set a goal of reading 10 pages per day, but I have other obligations in life, and sometimes other things are prioritized. So by setting the bar so low, I keep my identity stable of being a reader, but I also am able to do it without completely changing my life or completely changing my investment of my time. Step number 4, don't read the whole book. When I was younger, I had an encyclopedia with very basic definitions and geography and animals and stuff related to that. And I swear I was reading the encyclopedia from start to finish because I did not know how it worked. I was like 5 years old. But the point still stands that nonfiction books in general act more as an encyclopedia. I wouldn't read an encyclopedia from start to finish, so I do not see the need in some cases to read a nonfiction book from start to finish, depending on how invested I am in the material or what I'm specifically looking to get out of the book. I like to read about 10% of a nonfiction book before I gauge whether or not I'm interested in it or I enjoy it. And sometimes I don't want to read it, and that's okay because there are other books that I can read. But if I force myself to read a book that I don't like, I'm simply going to demotivate myself from reading, and it's going to become less of a habit because I'm not going to be looking forward to it or be excited to do it. Reading should be something exciting. It should be something that I look forward to. So trying to force myself to read or finish a book is not worth it. With fiction books, I would say I read more about 20% before I gauge whether or not I enjoy the material. It's more of a tricky situation because there's a lot more context to provide, especially with setting and world building, but I don't like some fiction books that many people enjoy, and that's okay. In fact, I remember bringing up the idea that I couldn't finish Fahrenheit 451 because I simply didn't enjoy it, and 2 of the people who I was sitting with found it to be their favorite book. So oftentimes opinions vary on whether or not a person likes a fiction book, and that's okay. But in general, like I said before, I'm not the biggest fan of fiction as of now. So in general, I do not spend that much time reading fictional books. And step number 5, the best way to remember everything that you read is to apply it to your life immediately. Yes, immediately. There are so many YouTube videos talking about how to remember everything you read, where it's telling you to take notes, to mark down the 3 most important things from the book, and yes, I think it's somewhat helpful to mark down the 3 main points of a book, but if I find myself trying to type out a summary of a book, which I've tried to do before, it's just completely useless in my mind. Obviously, the human mind isn't going to remember everything that it reads, but the best way to simply remember what a book does is to take those steps into action, which is why I find nonfiction books more related to self-help to be much more fascinating and captivating than fictional books. So when I find a book on a topic that I'm seeking advice in, I apply the steps from the book to my life and I reflect on my own life, and I find that to be the best way to remember the stuff that I read. I'm not going to be able to memorize word for word what a book says, and I can take the time to type down 3 main points from the book as a way to remember in the future. But taking the time to type it out like I'm in school and typing notes for a textbook is so tedious and completely impractical. So just taking the time to apply what I read to my life will change my life, first of all, but will also make sure that I remember what I read. And as a caveat, it's of course important to be skeptical of what I read. Everything I read, I apply to my life, but of course some books I will disagree with, especially if they're providing some sort of advice on a topic that I'm more familiar in. So I like to take everything I read and I will apply it to my life if I think that it will improve my life. Some books talk about different ways of living your life that I do not agree with. Oftentimes, I just won't follow that advice, and that's okay. If you want to learn more about the stuff that I learned from reading, be sure to check out my video on the power of vulnerability and see my playlist on college advice linked above. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell, and I'll see you next time.